It's a pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Frank Worrell is a professor here in the Graduate School of Education at UC Berkeley. He's the director of the School Psychology Program, faculty director of the Academic Talent Development Program, and the California College Preparatory Academy. He also holds an affiliate appointment in the Department of Psychology. Frank is originally from Trinidad and Tobago, where he was both a teacher and a principal at a secondary school. He got a bachelor's in psychology and master's in educational psychology in Canada at the University of Western Ontario. And he got his doctorate here at Berkeley in educational school psychology. After that, he went to Pennsylvania State University, was on the faculty here, before joining the faculty here at UC Berkeley. Among the awards that Dr. Worrell has received are the Chancellor's Award for Advancing Institutional Excellence from UC Berkeley, the Distinguished Scholar Award from the National Association for Gifted Children, the Distinguished Contributions to Research Award from the American Psychological Association, and the Outstanding International Psychologist Award, also from the APA, the Palmarium Award for Gifted Education from the Merkridge College of Education at the University of Denver, the Distinguished Scholar Award from the National Association for Gifted Children, and just in case you're not yet having trouble keeping up with him, Dr. Worrell has ongoing research collaborations in China, Ethiopia, Germany, Iran, Israel, Italy, Japan, New Zealand, Nigeria, Peru, Slovenia, Sweden, Turkey, and the United Kingdom. Most important, he's the director of the Berkeley Way Chorus.
Yes.
Today, Frank will be talking about aren't gifted and talented the same thing? Moving from gifted education to talent development.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming. I know it's a very busy time of the semester. Every time I hear my bio, I actually think UC Berkeley is not paying me enough money. In fact, I wrote about that in a poem a number of years ago. So I'm going to be talking about gifted and talented today, and I know this is a topic that is sometimes controversial. Hopefully it'll clarify things to some of you. I'm looking forward to the questions and answers afterwards. And I'm going to begin with some context, right? So, states govern education, and in fact, a number of years ago, individuals with disabilities weren't often allowed to go to school. And in 1971, Pennsylvania Association for Retarded Children versus Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania court ruled that a state could not deny, put off, or end any intellectually disabled students' access to public education. It's the beginning of what led to the special education, the federal special education system. The next year, a similar ruling took place in Washington, D.C., Mills versus Board of Education. So, fast forward 3 years, and Congress passed what was Public Law 94-142, the Education for All Handicapped Children's Act. Most recent renewal is the Individuals with Disabilities Individual Education Act 2004. And that established special education as a federal mandate. All public schools should provide all students with a free, appropriate public education at public expense. And so it is on the basis of this law that individuals with disabilities actually, school districts are supposed to have to identify individuals with disabilities even before kindergarten, right? They need to start providing services at age 2, and they have to take them through age 21. So, this mandate, though, has been interpreted by the courts to mean passing. A good education is passing. So if you get a C grade, that's fine, right? So, we have a number of laws that apply to special education, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, learning disabilities and so forth, the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which is often used, for instance, for some of the categories that are not in IDEA, ADHD as a case in point. Many students who have ADHD as a diagnosis get served in schools under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and of course the adult version, the Americans with Disabilities Act. None of these apply to gifted students or individuals who are gifted, right? They are not considered special education. So, as I said, education is the province of the states, and the federal government provides no requirements for gifted education. Thus, any gifted education services that occur are dependent on the state. They vary from state to state, district to district, and school to school. There are 23 states that have a legal mandate to serve gifted students in their education code, and only 4 of them fully fund that mandate. So that's the context in which this is. Because I would argue that, in fact, a free appropriate public education should apply to all students. Students with disabilities and students who are talented as well. So, in the next 40 minutes or so, I have way too many slides, but it's a point of pride. I'm getting teased by one of my colleagues just the other day that I have more slides than he does, and I tell him I always finish and you don't. But and people say I talk too fast, so if I'm talking too fast, slow me down. This is sort of the overview that I'm going to take you through today. A number of things, perspective on giftedness and talking about gifted education and the pivot towards talent development, elements of gifted performance, the issue of underrepresentation, which of course is a big issue in gifted education, underrepresented students, and then ending with sort of the psychology of high performance and what I call a simple definition of giftedness. Now the basis of the talk, of course, is, this is on the basis of my work, but there's research in the field. I'm going to pass these around. The number of colleagues who we write together. We started writing together in 2009, so a decade ago. And this was the first thing we did together. And this is a 2018 book and a 2019 book. And a lot of what we are talking about comes out of these. So I'll start these circulating. So people can see. Okay. So I'm going to now talk about sort of these perspectives on giftedness. Giftedness is global trait, giftedness is practice, what I call retrospective giftedness. I'm not going to say a lot about that. And then giftedness as talent development. So let's start with giftedness as trait. In this cartoon, this young lady is completing an IQ test with her mouth. She's doing a handstand on one hand. She's playing the guitar with her feet, knitting with her other hand. And the teacher, psychologist, whoever it is, says, pity the test doesn't measure all of her skills, right? This idea that giftedness is a global phenomenon, and that if you are gifted, you are good at everything, and stuff. And so this is a very common view of giftedness. And so if we think of the most common tool often used in schools, IQ, which is not domain specific, right? The idea is if you are gifted, you have a high IQ, you are gifted, and so therefore you can do anything. See this again in this picture. So while all the people other little people in grade 4 are doing their little volcanoes and rocket ships, the young lady has done a skeleton of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, right? And I believe this will go down in science fair history, right? So this idea that gifted students are way above the rest. And this one I particularly like. You'll never get away with it. She's bound to know it was you, Pablo. Which Pablo is this? Picasso. Right, of course, because he was a cubist as a kid, right? Giftedness, you're born with it. Of course, early Picasso on the left is not cubist. And in fact, there are people who would argue that Pablo Picasso would not have become a cubist necessarily if he had not been born in the time period that he was. Cézanne came just before him, and some of Cézanne's work set him up, and then he had an ongoing rivalry with another colleague, and they were trying to push the envelope, and Cubism came out of that as a result, on the right. But this idea of giftedness as trait, I think, is very, very much in the literature. Giftedness as the outcome of deliberate practice. How many of you have read Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell? A number of you have. And he popularized the notion of 10,000 hours, right? But that actually came out of a study by Anders Ericsson, 1993, who is sort of the leading expert on deliberate practice. And Anders had done this study of, and Anders has studied a lot of people, chess players and so forth, but this study was on violin players. And these are the amount of hours that they spent practicing per week at the different ages, seeing before age 5, they were already practicing a couple hours a day. By age 20, they're practicing almost 30 hours. A week, 30 hours a week, right? And so there's a full-time job, right? And what was interesting, was a retrospective study. When he calculated, he found that the people who became teachers had practiced about 4,000 hours. Those who became very good players, had practiced about, 8,000 hours. And the elite performers, the soloists, with orchestras and so forth, had practiced about 10,000 hours. That's where that number comes from. And so Anders concluded that, in fact, and he's done studies, as I said, in many domains, that to get to expertise, you need about 10,000 hours. Now there's some contestation about that, which I'll get to in a minute. Retrospective giftedness. We'll know it when we see, somebody does something great as an adult, and then we go back and we look at their history and say, oh, they did this as a kid. That meant they were gifted. We just didn't recognize it, right? So this idea that, in fact, this is again related to this idea of giftedness is straight. It has to follow you through life. But even while all this was going on, I'd say there was a movement towards talent development, right? And there are many conceptualizations of giftedness. For those of you who are interested in this topic, Sternberg, that's Bob Sternberg and Davidson have a book, 1986. The second edition came out in 2005 called 20 Conceptions of Giftedness. And in each of those volumes, they have 20 plus chapters of giftedness. We've also done a brief review in an annual review of psychology piece earlier this year, where we sort of divide these conceptions into those ability conceptions, talent development models, and integrative models, right? But to start with the first one of the things about talent development is that it's domain specific. And so even though there was this idea of giftedness as straight, in the federal government's definition of giftedness, Marlin Report 1972, they identified giftedness in 6 areas, right? Intellectual ability, academic achievement, creativity, leadership, the visual and performing arts, and psychomotor ability. Now, the interesting thing about this, psychomotor ability is in parentheses, because the government, they subsequently dropped that from their list, right? Now, what I find particularly funny about them dropping that is that I think the outcome of the best talent development programs in this country, the Basketball Association, NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball, National Hockey League, psychomotor ability, but they dropped it. People, of course, many teachers resonate to Gardner's idea of intelligence, his intelligences, right? And Gardner, I think, gets it right in many ways. He talks about the use of words, right? So poets and novelists and stuff are gifted in using words. Use of numbers, use of spatial relationships, and so forth. So that this idea of the domain being important. Now, one of the things that a lot of people think is that you have to be good in one of these. If you do a grid, then you'd be good at least in one of these. Of course, the way individuals' differences work is that there are a few people who are good in all of these. I hate those people. And there are a few people who are at the bottom in all of them. And then a lot of us are in the middle on many of them, with having our strengths and weaknesses. But Renzulli in 1977 gave us a definition that I think really set us on the path towards giftedness as talent development. And I like the stem. Giftedness is the product of the interaction. So it's an outcome, right, of above average but not necessarily superior ability. So in other words, he's saying you don't have to have the IQ of 130, right? Above average but not necessarily superior ability, task commitment, work, and creativity. So this was Renzulli's definition. As I said, he has a chapter in that Sternberg and Davidson's first edition. But also in that book, it hasn't gotten the attention Bob Renzulli has, because I have not seen them write anything together, was a definition that I think went a bit further and actually captured it more accurately. is again, they start the outcome of an interaction among abilities that have successfully coalesced. So you have abilities, but they've come together in a way that are making sense. A setting that allows for and encourages the expression of those abilities. We're in a graduate school of education. Education is important. Classrooms, tracks, wherever, there's a setting that allows for that. Obstacles that hone or refine. Homework, projects, how are we in fact spiraling this ability upward, right? And again, this idea of commitment that allows for the expression to be fully developed. So that's the foundation for some work. In as I said, in 2009, some colleagues and I started working on a manuscript, the monograph that's going around, the psychological science and the public interest piece. Rena is at the American Psychological Association. She runs the Center for Schools and Education. And Paula is the director of the Center for the Talent Development at Northwestern University, which is they run summer programs for academically talented kids, as well as programs during the summer and so forth. We did a comprehensive review of the literature and came up with a rather complicated definition, but we were trying to get at a definition that encompassed not just academics, but all domains. We wanted to encompass all domains. And so what we think, so giftedness is a manifestation of performance or production, right, an outcome, that's clearly at the upper end of the distribution in a talent domain, even relative to that of other high-functioning individuals. We'll see that in a minute. It can be viewed as developmental because in the beginning, giftedness is potential. When we measure a kid's IQ in grade 2 and we put them in a gifted program, when in fact we identify a kid who is very good in football or very good in languages or whatever, and we start giving them, we have identified potential, right? And so potential is in the beginning stages, then achievement, ultimately expertise, and at the very top stages, eminence. Now, I should tell you that that part about eminence, we got a lot of pushback in the field about this. In fact, James Borland, the distinguished professor of gifted education at Columbia University, wrote a landmark monograph in gifted education and why I disagree with its major conclusion. And the conclusion he disagreed with was eminence. But we think he's wrong, and I'll show you in a bit. It involves psychosocial variables. This is the commitment part. They play an essential role in its manifestation and develop at every development stage. Motivation, persistence, all of those kinds of things, right? Effort are important aspects of giftedness. I could have the most brilliant mind for languages. If I never learn vocabulary, I will never become a linguist, right? I've got to do something, right? So gifted performance must be developed and sustained by way of training and interventions. And the goal of this developmental process is to transform that potential into performance and innovation in adulthood, right? So, how many of you here do not use Facebook at all? Okay, a few of you, okay? Many people use Facebook, and Zuckerberg is one of the richest people in the world now. He was actually in, not the Northwestern program, he was in the gifted program at Johns Hopkins, which was the first one, the Center for Talented Youth. He was a CTY kid. So they claim him proudly. I don't know if he's given them any money, but I wish he'd come to ATDP. We could use him. So giftedness is a talent development journey. It's a journey, all right? And so you're starting with that potential, moving up to competency, expertise, and then eventually to creative or scholarly productivity. And it's based, there are a number of things on which it's based on. So general ability, what we call, generally referred to as IQ, domain-specific abilities, and then opportunity, optimal teaching, psychosocial strengths, and chance. Chance plays a role as well. Talk about that in a bit. But take a little bit of detour into biology. I think it's important to recognize, right, that most talent domains, football, music, whatever, are polygenic. In other words, there are multiple genes that contribute, right? And these genes speak to the psychology, cognition, emotion, and so forth. the components are multiplicative, right? So at least this is the argument, right? So we can say 5 plus 5 equals 10, but 5 by 5 is 25, right? That in fact, having both multiple traits actually gives you bigger bang for your buck. So the talents are really the results of configuration of components, and different profiles may lead the same talent, right? So we can do, right, so we can, I'm trying to think. 5 by 5 is 25. I can go, I can get to 25 in other ways. I'm not going to try to do this. But you understand what I mean, right? You can get to 25 in several different ways. And so this idea that in fact people may be talented and may be manifesting what appears to be the same talent, but their profiles may be different, right? And I don't know how many of you have seen the commercial for Southern New Hampshire University. They start off with how many of you are in the military, how many of you are mothers and that kind of thing. And then they talk about the talent is evenly distributed, normally distributed, opportunities are not. They're lying. Talent is not evenly distributed. You can bet that the children of the NBA players have more potential for basketball than many of us in this room, if only because of years of, and stuff. I mean, right, kids of basketball players tend to be, they make me look short, and I'm 6'1". So, so it's not evenly distributed, and that's one of the reasons talent shows low heritability, right? So even though it appears as if not every kid of a basketball player, every tall becomes a basketball player, not every tall person becomes a basketball player, right? Talent is not easily predicted. Also, traits do not manifest all at once, right? And that's epigenetics. They will kick in, grow at different speeds, level off, and end, right? And what this means is that somebody may manifest talent late in life that they didn't show early in life. There may not be an early sign of that, and different individuals may begin to manifest talents at different ages. Think about the chance factor. If you have the genetic potential to be a really great gymnast, but that doesn't manifest till about age 18, you're out of luck. Because gymnastics, 16, 17 is the peak of the career, right? And so that, chance plays a role again. Individuals' talent may change over time, and talent can be lost. This is another controversial thing in the field. One of our colleagues wrote, well, if you get identified as gifted in grade 4, you're going to be gifted when you're an adult. And we agreed to disagree. So here we have some of the initial conditions. We have, so people are starting at different points with different potential. And what this is showing sort of the range of potential, right? And in some sense, the more potential you have at the very beginning of life, the greater the distribution you can be, because you can do very much with that potential or very little. And it may not because you didn't want to do much, it may be your circumstances. So I'm not blaming the individual, the individual circumstances, right? So did you get appropriate teachers, right? Or did you get did chance work in your favor, right? Psychosocial factors and so forth. I'm very much standing in front of you in large part because of chance. When I applied to UC Berkeley to do my PhD, I was told I was applying for teaching assistantship and they wanted me to come to interview. I didn't have much money, I was in Trinidad, and they said, well, can you come next week and interview? And I said, well, not really. And so I said, can I send my resume? And they said, well, don't bother to send it, we never hire without an interview, and you can bring it when you come. And I'm thinking, I'm never going to be there. So I went home, and I didn't have a resume, and I went to the manual typewriter, and I was going to type up my resume, but I didn't know what one looked like, because my parents didn't have one. I was the first in my family to go to college. So I went to our Collier's Encyclopedia, and I looked up resume, and I read it, and I said, okay, and then it says CCV, and I went to CV, curriculum vitae, and I looked that up, and I said, I want to do this second one. I want to tell them as much about me as possible. And so I did that, and I sent it off by DHL, the only courier that came to Trinidad at the time. FedEx, UPS, DHL is the third carrier. So I sent it off on a Friday. I typed it up on the Thursday, sent it off on the Friday for a Monday delivery. Paid a fair amount of money. I got a letter dated the Tuesday. They were interviewing the next week, so I wanted it to get in there. I got a letter dated the Tuesday offering me the teaching assistantship. And that's, in essence, how I ended up at Berkeley, because I would not have been able to come. So if I had not taken that chance to send that in, because they said don't bother to send it, right? It's not going to matter. So I sent it anyway. So, giftedness is a talent development journey. It starts off with a much more at the beginning and ends with a lot. So, it gets fewer. So just to get a sense, right? The standards for gifted performance increase in adulthood. If you have a 5-year-old who can recite a sonnet, that's great memory, right? If you have a 14-year-old who can recite a sonnet, it's not a big deal. But that accomplishment is not great for a 14-year-old, right? An IQ of 130 puts you in the top 2.3% of the population, but 2% of the population gets doctorates, and those of you in this room who are getting PhDs or who have PhDs are in the top 1% of the population, right? So, even fewer, of course, earn the label eminent, right? How many players in the NBA are gifted? Basketball.
Few.
Hmm?
Few.
Few?
All of them.
All. They are all gifted relative to the general population. They are not all gifted relative to NBA players, right? And that's exactly the point, right? Because we know some of them. We know Steph Curry and LeBron James and Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan and etc., right? They're the names that we know, right? But everybody in that group is actually gifted, right? Nobel Prize. For those of you interested, this is the one way to get your own parking space here at Berkeley. I do not have my own parking space. There are 22 Pulitzer Prizes awarded annually. I mean, when you think about it, 69 Fields Medals in mathematics have been awarded between 1936 and 2018. Less than 2% of college athletes become professionals. And in the high revenue sports, it's less than 1%. Other things about talent development. That there is a beginning, there's a peak, and there's an end. And so that differs, right? So in music, a boy soprano, and I'm talking about after the age of castrati, boy sopranos, once their voice deepens, they are no longer boy sopranos. I actually used to sing the top line of the Hallelujah chorus. I now sing the bass line. Right? Violin is one of the early specializations. So it starts early, boy sopranos start early. Now, flute starts relatively middle of adolescence because you need to have a certain amount of lung capacity. You can start playing it earlier, and then it goes on for a while. But if you think about the tenors and so forth, they start mid-adolescence and they move on middle to late adolescence and they move to adulthood. In athletics, gymnastics by late adolescence is peaking and starting to go down, whereas track and field goes on a bit longer. Usain Bolt, I think, just retired. Academics, right? Mathematics is one of the early starting areas. You can be a prodigy in mathematics, in elementary school. Psychology is a specialty that starts in the late adolescence if you are lucky. Many high schools don't necessarily have psychology, but it continues for a long time. So there are different trajectories based on domain. There are also different types of domains. We've divided them into what we call performers and producers, right? Performers, everybody's doing something, right? But the producers leave something tangible behind. One can say that an actor, something that, you videotape it, right? But the act, what the actor does or the singer does in a performance is gone. You can capture it, but it's actually gone. Now, there are similarities between performers and producers. They have to master the content of their domain. They need guided and deliberate practice. They have to have commitment and motivation, those psychosocial variables. They need to understand the values of the domain, and psychosocial skills limit or enhance success. But perhaps more importantly are the things that distinguish performers and producers. I know that's a little small to read out. The first thing is that what you need to practice is much more clearly defined in the performance domains. So if I want to be a good basketballer, what are some of the things I need to practice?
Shooting.
Dribbling, shooting, free throws, right? So and in fact, one often sees oneself getting better when one is doing this. If I want to be a physicist, what do I need to practice? It's, you know, I mean, but you understand the point I'm making, right? You know, one can do equations, but is it practicing to become a physicist, right? And so what you need to practice is much more clearly defined in the performance domains. The judgments experts are trusted throughout the process, right? So even in high school and stuff, you know, we trust coaches and so forth. In the production domains, many people don't trust the judgments of high school teachers. They don't trust necessarily the judgments of professors. Robert Sternberg and Phil Zimbardo, both past presidents of APA, Sternberg's triarchic theory, well known, Zimbardo, the Stanford Prison Studies, both of them got a C in intro psych. And they're convinced that their teacher was somehow wrong. I actually pointed out to them that maybe they did C work in intro psych, that just because they're eminent as psychologists doesn't mean that their intro psych work was eminent. But, you know, but they're convinced that their intro psych professors gave them a grade that was way below where they should have been. Physical abilities matter in the production domains, right? Sport, you know, so physical abilities matter much less, right? I mean, you know, we can think of the physicist who was a paraplegic, right? So that those things don't matter, as physical abilities don't constrain your. There are limited opportunities in the performance domains. There are only so many NBA teams. And to add a new team is a big deal, right? But there are many more physicists. There are lots of people who can get PhDs in physics if they chose to so do and they had the skill to do it. And if they came up with something that was an outstanding find, it would be an outstanding find. So it's interesting that oftentimes the fields that people want to get into more are the ones where they're sort of the hardest to get into. And the domain is typically, performance domains are appreciated by the public in a way that production domains are not. So we talk about those people who got Fields Medals in mathematics. How many of us understand what they did to get the Fields Medals in mathematics? We don't, right? I don't understand some psychologists, and I'm a psychologist. So, you know, so that in fact, but we can appreciate a good musical performance. We can appreciate a good sports performance, right? And, you know, and stuff in a way that we don't. So this is the model writ large, right? There are a number of things. And so I'm going to sort of go through now what we call sort of the necessary ingredients. We call this the talent development mega model. I'm going to briefly run through some of these topics and stuff to see where we are. Okay. So these are the topics I'm going to run through fairly quickly. So starting with general ability. This is what's IQ and so forth. And there are lots of people who believe that IQ does not matter. There are lots of books on saying that, oh, you don't need ability, just practice, and if you have the right opportunity, things are going to work. But anybody who has been a teacher knows that that's not true. How many of you have had students, I mean, students, one student started off lower than another, but by the end of the class, that student is cranking much more than the other, right? The graph on the right. We see that happening. It happens, right? The first longitudinal study of gifted, Louis Terman at Stanford, measured IQ in 1921 and 22, and then they followed these people who had a score of 140 or above for many, many years. They didn't have many individuals who became eminent, but they mostly did very well in life. And they had above, not only did they do very well in life, so the academic side, they actually had above average emotional functioning, social functioning, volitional functioning, self-regulation. A lot of people think that, oh, if you're gifted, then you're socially awkward. That actually is not held up in the research. It's not true. That in fact, gifted students typically, because if we think of IQ or general ability as the ability to function in one's environment well, then in fact, you can realize when you need to not be obnoxious, etc., right? If you're using your reasoning abilities more generally, right? So abilities do matter, but not just general ability. Ability in specific domains matter as well. And I'll give you just some examples of this. This is David Lubinsky and Camilla Benbow at Vanderbilt. They're the co-PIs of the study for mathematically precocious youth, started in the 1970s. They identify students on the basis of the SAT scores before the students at age 13. And they have been following, they're doing a data collection follow-up, and I think they're people in their 60s, right? But they've been following them since age 13, Joel and Stanley started it. What these graphs are showing, you'll see higher verbal ability to the left, higher quantitative ability to the right, SAT, verbal and quantitative, right? Those verbal and quantitative scores. And then going up on the y-axis is the ability level. So you can see, if I can get this to work, so people who have 4-year degrees, bachelor's degrees and master's degrees in humanities and STEM, see the ones with the STEM are tilted, they're more math-oriented versus the ones who are humanities. They're more, right, verbal-oriented. But interestingly, look where the ability level is, right? When we go to those who are getting PhDs, we can see that the tilt increases, but the ability level increases, the scores are higher, right? So then we get tenure track, faculty members, and then we even go to publications and patents. Again, you see the tilt and the ability level. So that the more contributions you make, ability matters, domain-specific ability matters. And they've shown this in a number of ways, that in fact, they can look backwards and identify, the ones who are more quantitatively oriented didn't like the more humanities-oriented courses in high school, they were the less favorite courses, and vice versa, right? And so, and when you add spatial ability, which this one does to the graph, you are actually able to pinpoint who is more likely to go in an engineer versus a lawyer and that kind of thing. And so that in fact, ability level and domain-specific abilities matter, right? Again, there are people who say that once you're gifted, but like everything else, there's a range of ability, so if you have IQ of 130, let's say, if you have an IQ of 130, IQ goes up to what typically is 162, I think is the high score. They use, again, the SATs, at the bottom there, those are their scores, so the lowest score there is 858. Remember, these are SAT scores, combined scores from before age 13. I'm so glad I didn't have to take the SAT because I was from a foreign country and I didn't go to the US for undergrad. So I don't have to tell you that I don't think my scores would have been that high. But those scores, as you can see, as the scores get higher, and this is the top, this whole sample is the top 1%. But as you get higher in the top 1%, quartile 1, quartile 2, quartile 3, quartile 4, you can see that in fact the accomplishments get greater in terms of doctorates earned, STEM publications, patents, income level, literary publications, and so forth, right? So ability matters. It's the same thing. They have a chapter in the AP Handbook of Giftists in 2018. Task commitment. Why do we identify people for gifted programs, including grad school? David Leminski says so that they can work harder. I actually tell my students this all the time. How many of you got to grad school and didn't realize you'd have to work as hard as you have to? Ability without hard work does not make for success. Without task commitment, there is not development in any domain. And task commitment in some fields involves deliberate practice, right? So, where the goal is talent development, music, chess, many of the athletic sports, right? Michael Jordan going from not getting onto the varsity basketball team when he was a sophomore, but with practice made it to the varsity team, okay? Right, it's designed to improve performance, it can be repeated a lot, you get feedback, role of the coach, it's mentally demanding, it is not necessarily fun. It is really intended to make you better. What does this tell us? The people at the very top don't just work hard, they work much, much harder than everyone else. Actually, that's from Outliers, and the 10,000 hours notion that Gladwell popularized. Come back to this, right? 4,000 hours, 8,000 hours, 10,000 hours, right? But there's a caveat here, there's ability and practice interact, right? So, how many of you recognize the name Salieri? How many of you do not recognize the name Salieri? The younger people in the room. There was a movie called Amadeus. When was it? I'm not sure when it came out. In the 90s or something? That's when a lot of people heard about Salieri. Salieri was a contemporary of Mozart, right? Now, think about the idea of deliberate practice, right? Salieri died at 74. He began studying music early. He wrote 37 to 45 operas. There are some ones that don't have the name, but the style seems to be his. That's why there's the range. And 4 of his operas are available on DVD. Lots of deliberate practice, right? Mozart died at 35. He began studying music early. He wrote 20 to 22 operas. All 22 are available on DVD. Mozart did more in his shorter time than Salieri did in twice the lifetime. So that the idea that ability does matter. Now, it doesn't mean that, in fact, people without, I mean, Salieri was a great musician for his time. You know, Mozart just happens to be one who became eminent. And so ability does matter. And this very complicated figure is actually a replication. So the bottom is the study for mathematical precocious youth that I showed you before. And the green is humanities, the purple is STEM, and the gray, I think, is law or something. What's the gray? JDs. But they replicated it with the Duke Talent Identification Program. So again, showing that that you can predict on the basis of domain-specific abilities. Development. Gifted performance as an adult does not occur in the absence of an effective teacher, mentor, or coach. We play a role, those of us who are educators, right? And the expertise of this guide is in pedagogy, bringing out the best in the mentee. UC Berkeley just fired one of its basketball coaches after 2 losing seasons. That happens in the sports field a lot. Not just teams, but also individual players, right? Different types of teachers are needed at different stages of development. Benjamin Bloom, who's most well known for Bloom's taxonomy, actually studied gifted ed. A lot of people don't know that. And he argued that the stage 1 teacher, teaching from potential to competence, teaching you to love the subject. So do you have a teacher who in elementary school who teaches you to love mathematics, to love writing, because you need to have that love, that passion to continue when the going gets hard. The stage 2 teacher competence to expertise is teaching for technique. You know, you're doing algebra 2 and then you're doing calculus, you get into high school and you're learning how to write college, and in psychology you're learning research methods and those kinds of things. And then stage 3 is mentoring for personalized niche. Those of you getting PhDs, you're becoming researchers. You're carving out an area of expertise that will be yours as you move forward. So that's the role of the teacher. Opportunity. Opportunities matter, and they matter a lot. Opportunities must be provided. Society needs to do that. We'll talk on, they must be taken up. I can give you an opportunity, but you don't have to take it up. If you don't take it up, you're not necessarily going to be successful. And opportunities need to be provided because talent development typically requires resources. Social, cultural, financial, right? So Bloom talks about families of resources from that study that he did with 3 types of teachers, that in adolescence, these were families who had resources. In adolescence, the family becomes, the talented adolescent, their talent becomes the center of the family. So there's an example, a friend of mine, her daughter was doing dance and cello. At about age 12 or 13, she had to decide, which one am I going to do? She chose cello. Okay, so she's taking cello lessons. They lived in Santa Barbara. The cello professor at Santa Barbara moves to the University of Washington. A bit too long to commute, so they were looking around for a good cello teacher. The nearest one they found, University of Southern California, LA. She was taking cello lessons 3 times a week. The family was driving with the mother. The father was working. The mom stopped working, driving them to LA 3 times a week with the brother, so they're doing their homework in the car and then she goes to play cello. Well, to develop cello, there are a lot of cello trios, so she needs to practice. So the mother takes up the cello and the brother takes up the cello. So that the daughter can practice cello trios. And now they have to move 3 cellos and 4 people when they're going to performances. If they didn't have money, if they did not have, they had to buy a new car, in fact, a SUV and stuff, that they could afford to do that, right? But imagine a poor family. Where could they afford 1 cello? Far less 3. Can they afford to go to LA 3 times? But you understand, resources. And that's not the only thing. And resources become very important because Gifted programs, including ours, ATDP, are filled with kids with high opportunity and high motivation. But there are lots of kids with high motivation and low opportunity, right? One of the things we do is that if you get in, we will provide, and you can't afford, we'll provide the funding, right? The idea is you should be able to access the classes even if you can't afford. But, think about all the kids who have high motivation and low opportunity, and then kids who have low motivation and so forth. In the recent scandal, college scandal, the young lady who high opportunity but low motivation, she doesn't, wasn't planning on going to class and stuff. Well, now she's not gonna go to class since the university has revoked her admissions, right? The one who's the media star, the internet star, right, who didn't want to go to college, her parents paid how much, 500,000? Could have given that to me. Psychosocial factors. Psychosocial factors are at the bottom of our model, and they act as delimiters or enhancers. So they can take away from talent development, or they can contribute to talent development, right? Low motivation, unproductive mindsets, and so forth, right? And motivation is an important aspect here because we think of it as a singular construct. But motivation is not a singular construct. It's a constellation of constructs. And it's affected by the messages that you receive from society and so forth. So it's not just a psychological construct, it's what we call a psychosocial construct. Because if you are getting messages from your teacher that you're not smart, you may be very good, but you may begin to doubt yourself and your pathway may be diverted if your teacher is giving you resources. So in the 2018 book, there's a chapter I did on motivation. These are just some of the things: attributions, interest, intrinsic motivation, self-efficacy. Many of these are motivation constructs, right? Leading to competence, effort, engagement, and persistence. And the important thing to note here is, so one starts off with potential ability, right? Motivation leads to effort, that leads to growth, develop talent. But when you get to the end of grade 3, what happens? If you're not skipping a grade, you go back to the beginning of grade 4. At the end of undergraduate, you go back to the beginning of grad school. So that you are constantly cycling right, because you're getting higher and higher, the world is getting more challenging. That's how you're developing, but you're always having to keep up your motivation. So there's that book. And then, Chance. Who remembers the 2012 NBA season? Who's a basketball fanatic in here? Anybody?
I wouldn't say fanatic, but yeah.
Do you know what? Remember what happened in the? Let me give you it's a big hint. Linsanity.
Yeah, Jeremy Lin.
How many people remember Linsanity?
New York Knicks.
Aha. Jeremy Lin, right? Jeremy Lin actually is a Bay Area guy from San Francisco. He was Player of the Year in high school. After he finished, he did not get athletic scholarship. So he went to Harvard. And he finished that, and he didn't get that, and he signed with, who was this? Anybody know who his first team was? The Golden State Warriors. He came back here. He wasn't with them very long, but in any case, when he ended up, I think it was at the Lakers in 2012, he was a backbench. He's one of the gifted basketball players who never got to play. Somebody got injured, and he got put into the game. Chance. Did brilliantly, got put into the next game, did brilliantly, and so forth. And that's what happened. And then Chance again, he got injured. And as he came, so he went, right? So Chance plays a role. Underrepresentation. Okay, bang on 5. Let me see how many slides I have to go. Okay, so gifted ed. African Americans and Latinos are underrepresented in gifted education. Asian Americans and European Americans are overrepresented. Lots of people say that's because of bias and a lot of things. I think it's because of these 3 things. I mean, it's known as the achievement gap. Many people talk about the opportunity gap that's actually related to that achievement gap. And in gifted education, they've coined the term the excellence gap. How does one get into classes for gifted students? By doing well. What these data show is that if we look at the percentage of students by ethnic racial group who are performing at the advanced level in math in grade 4, we can tell which ones are more likely to get into gifted ed, right? Asian Americans and European Americans. We see the same pattern at grade 8. I mean, the pattern, and you know, this is reading at grade 4, and actually I've looked at it, it's present in civics. This gap is present in civics. So one of the reasons for the low representation has to do with the actual performance. And we see this in the gifted programs in things. So selective universities are gifted programs, in essence, gifted education programs. We see the same pattern. This is the UC system. The only campus that has more than 50% of any minority group is UC Merced. 52%. It's the least selective campus. It's the most recent campus, right? But we see the same pattern in the Ivy League and in selected private universities. And this is from a New York Times article, 2017, where they were looking at the achievement gap. So the American cultural context, right? Our demographic factors, race, etc., play a role in how we are interpreted in this country, and we know that individuals are devalued due to their group membership. In fact, one of the people who does a lot of devaluing these days happens to be the president of the country. And so research tells us that members of minority groups are most likely to look for and interpret teachers' messages that they have low ability. Because of the stereotypes in society, they are looking at the teacher. So when a teacher says something to them, they are interpreting what the teacher says. And when providing feedback, there are some stereotype studies that suggest wise feedback, right? That minority students are more likely to take critical feedback as a message of a lack of competence than as a way to improve, as a message of bias on the part of the teachers than as a way to improve, right? So there are several theories that explain this. Cultural ecological theory talks about it. Stereotype threat talks about it. All of these are theories that are speaking to the intersection between identity and competence, right? And of course we have other issues, right? Now, at AERA, at a session, there's a psychologist was asked, why are you not dealing with structural racism? Why are you doing individual interventions? Well, one, he's a psychologist, but secondly, I would argue that in fact, just for the sake of argument, if the world had 25 people and was racist, that if we were able to change the behaviors of 20 of those people to be non-racist, we'd have a better chance of ending racism if we were trying to change racism at the system level. Not that you shouldn't try at the system level, but in fact, structural change can also come from individual change. And I think that's important to keep in mind. These are data from our program, and these are data looking at the ethnic applications by ethnic group. So the green is Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, blue is African American, the yellow is European American. And what you're seeing, these are the application rates. These are application rates relative to their percentage in this particular slide, I think in the county. In the next slide, same pattern, this is in the state. These are the application rates for Asian Americans. Now, one of the things I want you to note that these are negative numbers here. Negative numbers. Why are Asian Americans in the program more than other groups? Not just because they're doing better in school. They are also applying more, right? In fact, when we look at the pattern of representation in the program, we find that it matches the application pattern, suggesting that if minority students were to apply more, right, why don't they apply more, right? So we come back to these gifted ed statistics. And I would argue, so let's look at these domain statistics. I'm almost done. Right, so NFL players, gate, we can see that there are some domains in which minorities are doing much better, right? Look at Hispanic Americans in baseball, right? Certainly African Americans in basketball and football, right? So, but to start on this journey, you need to believe that you can get to the end, right? That you have a shot at getting to the end. And I think many groups don't believe that they have a shot at getting to the end because gifted education is seen as exclusionary and elitist, and fair advantages should be discontinued, right? But I would argue that should we get rid of gifted education? Should we get rid of the NBA, the NFL, and so forth? Or should we actually get rid of the lack of opportunity that gives people a shot? So we need to do things that in fact make members from minority groups believe that they have as good a chance in physics as they do in basketball and in singing. And why does that matter? This slide shows that Harvard has a disproportionate influence on society in terms of federal judges, billionaires, senators, House members, Fortune 500 CEOs, and so forth, that in fact they're not just Harvard, but other elite schools, right? That they actually, these are the people who are making decisions about our country, in most part, with the exception of the president. This was that book that you just saw, and I'm just gonna run through this. This is that last book. We looked at these domains, and it's a follow-up to Bloom's 1985 study. And basically we're saying, what distinguishes people in these areas? So psychology, for instance, there's no strong evidence for domain-specific ability. In mathematics, having mathematical reasoning is a very strong predictor. So psychology is general intelligence, mathematics has much more domain. So you have to have general and domain-specific, right? Mentoring is important. Trajectory for eminent psychologists, entering a prestigious grad program, early publication, a high-impact publication by age 30. In golf, Tiger Woods is the exception, not the rule. Many golfers don't make the decision to become elite until about 15, 16, 17. His father started him very young. One of the important things to note is resources. Fathers are members of golf clubs. You know, they belong to this they have access to a golf course, right? Which costs money, right? The culinary arts, which has now become a big thing. Now you have to have charisma and that kind of thing, a culinary signature. There was a time when you were just a cook. It's now a chef and a master chef. You have to do this, right? So what factors derail individuals with promise? Not persisting. Across every domain, not persisting. Loss of passion, I don't like doing this anymore. Lack of appropriate education or coaching. Not enough financial resources. And lack of a supportive family environment. So I would argue that a simple definition of giftedness is superior performance relative to the current peer group. So the professor is saying, we need someone to erase the blackboard who has only a master's degree here. See, this is long before the Big Bang, with Howard with just a master's degree, with the others have PhDs. So if you are in a school where that red line represents, in fact, the sort of 90% effort at school, that person is gifted. All schools should have gifted education. That's what the point I'm making here, right? Because many times what we do is we do the gifted ed above that other red line rather than this one, where a lot of schools are, particularly schools that are low resource schools. So how can society identify the domains in which a youth has outstanding potential early enough to allow for appropriate training and development? And in what ways can society support the development of talent in youth from low resource families? Potential talent regards education, training and development. Enrichment, acceleration, and rigor must be coupled with appropriate academic and social emotional resources. How many of you who are PhD students? How many of you have felt at some point in your PhD career, do I think I really belong here? I felt it too, yeah. I mean, because things are hard. Everybody else seems to be understanding this, right? Outstanding performance is the end of a marathon. It's not a sprint. And with regard to underrepresented groups, society must provide opportunities for talent development. And we need to create a critical mass of role models in academics, the way we have in entertainment and athletics. And I'll end with a quote by a colleague who's recently retired. It is time that we woke up to the realities that talent development will not happen if it is left to chance, to the accident of birth, or the serendipity of a caring teacher or a critical point in life. It will only happen if we have the will to work together and the insight to work smarter so that our efforts truly benefit the society and the high potential individuals within it that we all care so deeply about. Thank you very much. Questions? I know I threw a lot of stuff at you. Yes?
I know when we spoke last week, you had mentioned behavioral problems for some students. how does that factor in? Like some kids who have problem from
Right.
parents and so forth.
So I think it's an interesting question. So there's a certain group of psychologists, mostly clinical psychologists, who see people who have problems. And they have come to the conclusion that problems come along with being gifted. I mean, it's a really, just that they think gifted kids are antisocial or asocial, they can't get along well with others. There are all of these beliefs about gifted students that are not true. I think that what in fact, if you have behavioral problems, what that does is it limits your ability to interact with peers. It limits teachers' willingness to engage with you. So in fact, it limits your ability to develop your talent. I mean, there was a time when, I mean, think about John McEnroe and his famous temper tantrums, right? And stuff, right? And you know, oh, he's a gifted player, and so he was excused for it. Kathleen Battle was a gifted singer and was excused for her tantrums at the Met. But as soon as they got another singer who had as good a voice, they said to her, go away, we don't need you anymore. We have somebody who we are more prepared to work with. So that in fact, being behaviorally dysregulated actually, I think takes away from your ability to develop your talent. And we have to work with parents every year in our summer program who think that their little darlings, you know, should be able to do what they want and hit other kids and, you know, scream at the teacher and not listen and so forth. And we say, no, you're not coming to our program. But he's gifted. He has potential that we are not going to be developing if he cannot behave. Yes.
Can you say more about psychomotor abilities?
Well, psychomotor just refers to sort of the use of the body in some sense. So dance, athletics, and so forth. You know, that's the psychomotor domain. So you know, if we think of mathematical reasoning, so there are people who are really good physically. I mean, Kevin Durant on the basketball court. You know, not every game, but you know. He actually had a bad performance a few games ago and then did a very good performance the next game. And when somebody asked him, he said, I'm Kevin Durant, right? I mean, you know, today I'm being what I'm supposed to be, right? I mean, but when you watch, I mean, sometimes it's graceful. I mean, even if you don't play the sport, you can recognize, you know, that they are doing something that's phenomenal, right? So it's really just another domain, general domain in which there are many kinds of things, right? People who do physical comedy well are using psychomotor ability.
So you mentioned that persistence is like one of the key elements, and like in the literature, say like Angela Duckworth did a lot of work on grit, and she found like all these very successful people have grit, and that, you know, that's what kind of pushed them through difficult times. But there are also people who are saying like, a person with persistence and grit without the opportunity, which you also mentioned, won't have a stage for them to develop or even a stage to perform their talent. So like with all these achievement gap and income gap, what's your perspective on like?
Well, I think so. A couple things. One, when you read the grit study that accounts for 4% of the variance, Duckworth overstates. Grit may be important. Duckworth's measurement of grit is not very good. So let's get that out of the table. So I'm fine with grit as a construct, the idea, you know. But I think one of the things we often are looking for silver bullets, and there are no. The point I'm trying to make is that in fact, talent development, right, involves all of these things that I talked about. So it involves the persistence, it involves domain-specific ability in some cases, it involves general ability, it involves having a good teacher or coach, it involves the opportunity, right, and so forth. Many of these things we can control. Some of them we can't control the chance, for example. But society can control, if in fact we invested in education in the way that we should, we can control the opportunities that people get for academic development, right? If we invested in low-income schools and so forth, right? Because when you think about what the school in Piedmont gets from the school in Richmond right next door gets, right? In fact, because they're dependent on the local tax base, they're getting entirely different amounts of money. They're getting a certain amount of money from the state, but parents can supplement in Piedmont in a way that they can't in Oakland or in Richmond, right? And so those kinds of things, right? But they all matter. And the psychology matters as well because, again, I think Carol Dweck overstates mindsets, but belief is an important thing. Belief and hope, right? What education is doing is giving you a possibility of the future, right? I was the first in my family to go to college. I had no intention of getting a PhD. It happened because I got opportunities along the way that people saw things in me, right? But if I had not gone to college, my parents would not have been unhappy, right? They were glad I went. But, you know, so that we as a society need to provide opportunities for individuals who come from less resourced backgrounds and give them the opportunity to develop those talents. Patricia.
Yeah, so I'm always intrigued to know why Latinx students are not represented in gifted education. And one of the things that your presentation is making me think about is the category of chance. And after spending about 20 years as an ethnographer in public schools, looking at Latinx students, I know that there's a lot of talent, there's a lot of persistence, but there's a lot of, like, for example, they're bilingual, a lot of them are bilingual.
Right.
They do a lot of incredible translation and interpreting work. And so the category of chance seems so interesting to further unpack. Are our students always in a chance, and I just don't mean Latinx, but are they inhabiting this category of chance or this possibility of chance?
Well, I do think that's one of them. I also think, I mean, and, you know, people get very upset. I mean, people don't like Auguste's theory because they talk about blaming the victim. But I actually don't see Auguste's theory as a theory of victimization. I see Auguste's theory as a theory of agency. What Auguste is arguing, I think, or what, you know, was arguing, is that if I look at the society I live in, and I see that, you know, I'm in this classroom, and I do work, and my colleague does as well, let's say, you know, we do a paper that's genuinely equivalent, but that student gets an A and I get a C, right? Then why am I going to try? I maybe leave, right? So there are some things I didn't share because of time. I didn't go into the issue of a lot of the differences we find among the racial ethnic groups in the United States. But one of the things that we know, there was a study by New American Media. There are groups that are much less likely to believe in the American dream, right? They're much less likely to believe that the system is going to be fair. So that those things, so it's not just chance, right? It's actually a belief that the system is actually going to be fair to me, right? And if I get the opportunity, should I take it, or am I just wasting my time, right? So, I mean, I think, you know, we've seen a number, I mean, Green Book is the latest example of this. I mean, so I don't know how many of you have seen it. It's really a movie worth seeing and stuff, and that he persisted through, right? That takes an incredible amount of fortitude. And in fact, I think one of the interesting things about the movie, I mean, of course it's a dramatization, but he only gets angry once, right? And the white person who's his driver can't understand why he doesn't get angry. But if he gets angry, he loses the job. Because he's black in 50s America, right? He can't afford to get angry, right? Which means suppressing, right? So, you know, I mean, when you think about that, so that there's a lot of that I think is a part of what's going on. So it's not just chance. I think it's actually not believing that even if the chance is in my favor, that in fact society, the system will allow me to capitalize on that chance. Yes.
So from the presentation, the giftedness is domain specific, and these domains are very clearly defined. So have you been looking at how giftedness from in one domain transfers to another? Because that's transfer.
Well, what we were trying to do, the last chapter in the book actually, and if you remember the APA, well, I guess, actually you can write me, I have the last chapter because I'm a member of the APA system, so I can get the chapter, but not without the whole book. What we were trying to do was identify sort of the commonalities across. We do think there are specifics, right? So I mean, you know, performance versus production and those kinds of things. But there are some general patterns as well, and that's one of the things we try to identify in the last chapter in the book. what are the, and we, that's why we chose multiple domains. I mean, so I showed you the book actually has, as it said, software engineering, medicine. It has a variety of things, right? And so there are some overarching patterns, right? Good teaching is one of them across the board. I mean, and those kinds of things. So, yes.
So I work in nonprofits. I work with kids ages 6 to 18, and a lot of what I've seen where students are, you know, high performing and they try to make a decision with their future that's best for their family.
Right.
Where, like, you know, I want to go away to college. This really prestigious college has accepted me or something, but my mom needs help taking care of my younger siblings, or I need to like get a job, or I need to be close to home for some reason, or maybe it's even just that the family doesn't value or understand what the thing is that they're pursuing. If it's something as like, you know, vague as like physics or something,
Right.
they're like, why would you do that? So I don't know if you can speak to that at all.
No, I do think that plays a really major role, and I think, so if you think about Latinx communities, for example, the idea of familia is, you know, that, you know, is a really important thing, and it's really, you know, the support, I mean, it's not, they are more collectivist in some places, but it applies to African American communities as well. I think so there is this strong sense of the family comes first, right? Even when the family understands, the family comes first. And so that CalPrep, the California Preparatory Academy, one of it has an equivalent, a sister school at UC San Diego, the Preuss School. And one of the students there in the first cohort talks about that she stopped going home, and then one of our CalPrep students did the same thing. They stopped talking about going to college when they were at home, when they were in high school. Why? Because the family was trying to protect them and saying, you keep talking about college, I don't have money to send you to college, right? And the school kept saying, we'll help you apply for scholarships and stuff, but the parents were trying, or parent was trying to say, don't get your hopes up, right? When the school is saying, aim high, right? And stuff, and so you have this disconnect, you know, and stuff, and even, and so it makes for a very, very difficult time. But the other thing is understanding what you do. I mean, I'm a professor. I remember I went back to Trinidad. I was doing some work with the Ministry of Education. I said to my mom, well, my mom said to me, you're here again? I said, yeah. What are you doing? I said, I'm doing some work with the ministry. And she said, don't you have to teach or something? How can you be leaving your job all the time? Right? I'm doing research with the ministry. But there's no understanding that that's part of my job, right? One of my doctoral students, I was at his wedding, and his father said to me, so I know he's in school studying and stuff. When is he going to really get a job? You know, there's no sense, right? You know, so it's an important thing. So part of what we talk about in working with families is not so much family engagement as family education, right? Because what you need to do sometimes is to educate the family alongside the kid so that they understand the benefit of that. I'll be honest, you know, there was a student who was here at Berkeley, and I really would have loved him to work with me, but he almost didn't finish an undergraduate degree because he kept getting drawn into the family drama. And so he applied to Berkeley, and we did not admit him. But I wrote him a very strong letter of recommendation. He got into another thing. It's far enough away you can't just drive there, but it's not too far. You can get back in a couple hours and stuff, and strongly encouraged him to go, you know, a Latinx, and he's doing well. But I think if he were here, he might not be doing as well, simply because there was so much going on in the household that kept pulling him in, you know, so.
Well, I was also going to add that sometimes the decisions that they make, it actually seems like a very smart decision from where they're
Oh yeah,
standing.
no, yeah, you're right. I'm not trying to.
Oh no, I'm not saying that. I'm just like, you know, like if their family, like I was just talking to a student today whose family couldn't afford a caretaker, you know,
Right.
and so they became the caretaker,
Right.
and in that moment, like that was like the smartest thing that they could do.
Right.
But then they just lose out for themselves,
Right.
like in the long
And that speaks to a broader sense of opportunity, right?
Yeah.
So about what opportunities do you have to, in fact, if you are, as a kid, and I've worked with kids who are 15 years old and who are the major breadwinners for their family.
Yeah.
If they stopped working, the family stopped having income and paying the rent. And so those kinds of things are speaking to a lack of opportunity for these kids because their lives are constrained. Well, thank you very much for your great questions.
Thanks, Frank.